in the time we have for formal remarks, giving you a big picture of the way we see it from the national perspective, and also to a certain degree as it applies to New Hampshire. And of course, as you are probably well aware of, we released some numbers in July, or for the July existing home sales, that caught the press attention. And they were really pretty dramatic in terms of what they showed. We'll get into that in a couple minutes. But I think one of the things to keep in mind is how all that fits in the overall context of where we're at in terms of the real estate market, the economy. And so we'll spend a couple minutes on that, and then certainly be happy to take any of your questions. I believe you have the presentation in front of you, so even if we go through this relatively quickly, you'll have a chance to look at some of the information a little bit more closely, or ask some questions later on if it's something that you want some clarification on. But I guess the place to begin, perhaps I'm not as clear as I thought. Next slide. Is that there's some areas of strength and weakness in terms of the overall economy. We've been barraged with a lot of bad news over the last several months, but there are certain areas of weakness and strength. In fact, earlier this week, the Federal Reserve issued its beige book. Basically, it's a compilation of what all the Federal Reserve banks are saying about what's going on in their corner of the world. And what they said, basically, one of the quotes is widespread signs of deceleration. That's kind of economist talk that things are slowing down rather than speeding up. Whereas they said, say, in the Boston region, which obviously includes this area, business signs are positive on average. And you read through that report, and basically you see that difference throughout the entire report. Things are a little bit more grim when you look at it from the national perspective. When you look at it regionally or even at the state level, things are a little bit more positive. We can click through all of those. So in terms of the consumer, things are picking up. Business sector, things are picking up a little bit. The financial sector is still healing. The government sector, well, you know, the government, both the federal and state level, has lots of things that it's confronted with in terms of deficits. The global economy, that's one of the themes through this report, was actually a positive overall. And positive for the real estate markets for the simple fact that, given everything that's been going on in the rest of the world, the U.S. is viewed as a safe haven. That's one of the reasons we have mortgage rates under 5%. So next, the following question that we always get, are we headed for a double dip? And at this point, probably not. Now, that doesn't mean something unexpected can happen tomorrow or next week. We've all been through that over the last couple of years. The unexpected actually happened. Next slide, please. And one of the things that's probably the biggest weight on what's going forward at the national level, and again, these are the messages that consumers, whether New Hampshire or elsewhere, are getting, and that's in terms of the job picture. Jobs are the crucial aspect of what's going on, not only nationally in terms of the real estate picture, but at every local level. And this is going to be not only the headlines as we approach the November elections, about what do we do about jobs, but it's going to be with us for the next year, 2, 3, 4 years. Because we've dug a hole of about 8.5 million jobs lost, and we've only created about 750,000. What do you think that does to consumers' confidence about whether or not they want to buy a home next year? It's not particularly good. Next slide, please. In New Hampshire, things are a little bit better. Certainly saw a job decline, roughly 30,000 jobs, but we're already 1/4 of the way back from where we were. So things are a little bit more positive, again, consistent with what we have been talking about as far as the beige book report. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the unemployment rate, what do things look like nationally? Basically, if you're a purple or dark colored state here, you have high unemployment. And if you look in New Hampshire, it looks relatively good in terms of the unemployment rate. Next slide, please. And why is that? Again, here we've got the national, New Hampshire looks relatively good. There's a couple of things that could be happening. One's more positive and one's negative. The negative one is everybody who doesn't have a job has left the state, so the people who are left behind are the ones that are unemployed, right? That's kind of the negative view. But in fact, that's not the case. Actually, more people have been hired. You know, number of unemployed is down. So you can interpret that 2 different ways, but we can interpret this in a positive way. Fortunately, in New Hampshire over the last several months at least, we've seen a pretty significant decline in the unemployment rate. Next slide. Again, at the national level, new home sales, that's one of the key factors in terms of the economy overall. Traditionally, the economy, in terms of coming out of recession, construction, new home sales, they tend to lead us out of the recovery, or lead us into the recovery. Probably not the case this time. So home builders, construction, those things are probably going to be lagging the recovery at this point, partly because there's a lot of homes on the market already for sale, and the builders have cut back a lot. To a large degree, developers have a difficult time getting financing to start new home developments and subdivisions. So in fact, they're probably going to be lagging the economy as we turn around over the next several months, unlike what we would typically expect. Next slide, please. More locally, if you look at single-family permits in the state, and you can see roughly 6,000 over the earlier part of the decade declining. That's not too much of a surprise. But what we see over the January to July period, that last bar there, we're actually up a little bit from where we were a year ago. So there's a little bit more activity. Certainly not anything that's going to get us back to the 6,000 level anytime soon. But again, consistent with this idea, things are a little bit more positive in the region than they are elsewhere. This is reflected here as well. Next slide. Now, to touch on what I opened with in terms of the data we released in July and kind of the bigger sense of what's going on in terms of the national housing market. Of course, the national media follows the housing numbers very, very closely, and this has been an ongoing story for quite some time now in terms of what the housing market is doing. We've had 2 or 3 versions of the homebuyer tax credit. Consumers have been wondering if the next version of the tax credit is going to be extended or not, if there's a new tax credit that's around the corner or not. So what that means is, from the consumer's perspective, we've seen a lot of volatility. When the tax credit's been available, buyers rushed into the market. When there's some uncertainty about whether or not it was going to be available, they pulled back. The second version of the tax credit, buyers into the market. And now that we're off the tax credit, we saw a pretty significant decline in pending home sales. Now, the last month, you see a little positive hook toward the end there. So that suggests, and 1 month doesn't a trend make, but hopefully we'll be able to get a better read on this over the next couple of months. Things are at least stabilizing and perhaps turning around at the national level. Now, of course, that varies a lot across each region, each state, each community. But again, this is the message that consumers are getting when they turn on the local news after we release any of these national numbers. Next slide, please.